Right, so this is part 2 of my sort of first assessment draft, which is teaching past simple tense to Year 9 students in the emerging phase. So I'd start off with a bit of a brief introduction. When do we use the past simple tense? Well, it's used to describe actions which have occurred wholly in the past. You know, they've started in the past, they've ended in the past. They can't be ongoing. So, for example, I suppose you could use I walk my dog every day. That's something that I do. So to translate it into the past simple tense, I would say that I walked my dog. So generally, the past simple tense applies to verbs, that is, doing words, which have a special rule applied to them, which is essentially that the verb, the regular verb that you usually use, plus ed on the end of it. I walked my dog, I talked to my friend. So this is the rule that applies to all of the regular verbs. Generally speaking, it's the rule you'll apply when you're using it in practice. However, there is a little bit of a warning that comes with irregular verbs, which always throw these rules up in the air a little bit. The problem with irregular verbs in the past simple tense is that they don't follow this rule. And so the only way to really learn it is that you'll just have to, look them all up, learn them all, and practice them. Right. So. After this sort of initial instruction, I would begin a series of activities to make sure that students are engaging with it. So the first activity would be a feedback exercise. Each student would be asked to think of something that they did that week, something that's happened in the past. I would provide a few examples for reference so they know what they're doing. So again, I walked my dog, that kind of thing. And I would have them write it down according to the rules, in the past tense. Then, once everyone has sort of written something down, I would ask everybody to give their answers back to the group verbally. So depending on class size, either all of the people in the class, if it's a relatively small class, or as many examples as is practical for time constraints. So have each person say their event that happened in the past. Now, when teaching this, if any sentences with irregular verbs come up, immediately isolate them visibly, physically on the board, and make it clear to students that we'll have to come back to these and they don't follow the rule as assessed. When students give you an example which are perfect and don't need any correction, simply highlight the key word, the key verb, and point out what's been done right. And then if any mistakes are made, basically highlight where the mistake is, ask the student who provided the example to see if they can fix it, and if they can't, give the rest of the class a chance to fix it, and then again if they can't, then it's time for a bit of teacher intervention to dissect what's wrong with it. So after this activity, hopefully they've sort of taken all a bit of that on board, and the second activity would be to do with the irregular verbs, and we would be teaching the irregular verbs in a group work sort of problem solving scenario. So basically this would require a few materials, basically 2 sheets. One, a handout that has all of the relevant irregular verbs in the present tense, and then spaces next to them where students can write in the past tense. So every student will have one of these, and then they will be split into groups where they will be given a series of examples. These examples will be paragraphs which include all of the present tense verbs they have on their sheets in the past tense, just in a conversational paragraph. And the group activity will be for each member of the group to read one of the paragraphs out loud, and then each of the students will listen and they will hear for the irregular verbs that they know on their sheets and fill in what they think the past simple tense version of each of those verbs are. So the idea behind this is that first of all, students will be able to correct one another. It's a sort of a group effort. They all write down on their own individual sheets, but if one of them's having trouble picking out the right ones, they can get help from their group members. And second of all, it's getting each of the group members to verbally communicate, and each of the group members to listen and write. So it's including all of the sort of the main aspects of how to teach language in that respect. Basically, in this scenario, the teacher should be going around making sure everyone's on point. And the third activity is the more complex activity to make sure that they've really gotten this down. Now, this would ideally be its own class entirely. You probably dedicate a fair amount of time to this activity. But if you can't, then perhaps assign as homework that each student come in with a thing that has happened in their past, a thing that has happened to them that's sort of a paragraph long. And what you will do in this activity is that each student will write down their story, a thing that happened to them, paragraph long, in the present tense. Then they will pair up with another student and switch their stories, at which point they will then look at the other person's story and translate the present tense story into the past tense. Then they'll give give the sort of the respective sheets back to one another, and the original story progenitor will look through the translated story and sort of they'll give each other feedback on whether or not they think they're totally right on that front. At this point, me as a teacher, I'd be roaming around making sure that everyone's on point, making sure everyone's getting it, and if people are having issues with sort of certain words, maybe irregular verbs that we haven't gone through yet, or perhaps they're just struggling with the concept in general, giving them correction there where they need it. And finally, if there's any remaining time at the end, you will have some of the pairs of students read out their translated stories to the class in order to give them the practice with the verbal component of the skill. And sort of, if there are any errors that still manage to slip through the cracks throughout that whole process, you'll wait as the teacher, wait till they've finished their stories, and then you will sort of give them feedback on where they may have gone wrong or whether they've done everything right. So that will require a little bit of on-the-go note keeping. So basically that's my class plan for teaching the present tense. Hopefully it's sort of appropriate for the age, and it's sort of it's not too complex. Maybe I've missed some stuff. I'm happy to hear feedback and look forward to hearing from you.